Catus, Maximus here. This time we're talking about the Harbor Freight Icon. This time, fractional set. Deep well, short well, about 85 bucks if you can get them with the coupon. I had a reason for getting these because for the longest time I've been using these Mastercraft Pro. These are actually chrome vanadium impact sockets, and they've proven to be like unicorn sockets. Basically, they don't ever wear. Very minor wear, just really a super duty impact socket. They were only 7-piece set. I had upgraded with the Craftsman to 1/4 inch. These sets are 5/16 through 1 inch, no skips, 12 pieces each. So 85 bucks for 24 sockets. Definitely more price competitive than say Napa, but I think they're only marginally better than the Pittsburgh. These I would generally qualify as being thin wall impact sockets, and I don't know how well they're going to hold up. They are indeed chrome molybdenum. Of course, these icons do have the plastic trays, and they use up a huge amount of space. If you have space for them, use the trays. Otherwise, for me, I don't have space, so I'll be tossing these on socket strips because obviously that makes it much more compact. The reason I'm really saying that these are thin wall is because that's essentially what they are. I have been fiddling around. Here's our 9/16, and say compared to my Mastercraft Pro 9/16, we can see that it is substantially thinner. The walls are just not quite as thick, and so I am worried about the long-term durability. You know, if you're using these, especially some of the thin ones on high power air impacts, I don't know exactly how well these will hold up, but we'll see, and I'll do an updated review. This is kind of initial impressions after I picked these up because I've really been wanting to expand my fractional 3/8 impact socket set. Another thing, they do talk about chamfered openings. They do that right on the box. There's a slight chamfer, but it's not like significant. It's not what you would expect. Once again, like on this Mastercraft, there's a deep and obvious chamfer, so it allows it to get the socket around the head of the bolt, and then you can twist it on. Same thing with the receiving end. There's a very light chamfer, not a real distinct one. Also, a lot of impact sockets aren't including the undergroove because they're not using the through pin and then the rubber band that goes over, or O-ring that goes over it for the positive retention that's mainly only seen on 3/4 inch and inch drive nowadays. But I really like these Mastercrafts because they included that tradition. One of the advantages is that you have 2 holes, so it's easier to get this on whenever you're using a pin detent or a ball detent, anything that's not a hog ring. Just because you have 2 holes, so it's easier to hit them versus sockets that you have just one. I've measured these with the calipers. The icons are running just a couple thousandths larger than the Mastercrafts as well. I'll say on the deep wells, it's the same situation. They are definitely thinner than what you would consider a traditional thick wall impact socket. I should also mention, as far as sizing, that I was comparing because I did pick up the Icon swivel head sockets. This is the 3/8 drive 9/16, and what seems a little bit odd to me is that the swivel socket is actually thicker walls than the non-swivel, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I didn't pay a ton of money and get a lifetime warranty, so we'll see how these actually hold up. Another thing is such as this 5/16 here, what they've done just to save a little bit of money is all the 4 sockets below 1/2 inch here are all manufactured on the 1/2 inch stock, and then they just machine and forge the ends down. I've kind of accepted that this design because this gives you just a little bit more reach, a little bit more straight wall and clearance versus say maybe a more traditional impact socket where it's really thick, super heavy duty, but this thick taper here can restrict access. And on the smaller sizes, it isn't quite as necessary just to have all this extra material. So really, I don't mind what they've done here. It just would have been nicer if they would have used slightly thinner stock sizes, just so the socket wasn't, unnecessarily thick on the smaller ones, and on the larger ones, it's unnecessarily thin. They do other kind of hokey stuff just to try to save some money. Say right here we have our 5/8 socket and what is this, 11/16, and we can see both of these are also using the same stock size, and that explains why the 5/8 seems to actually have a nice thick wall and the 11/16 seems to be pretty darn thin. And to really impress upon you, we'll go back to our 9/16 because this is the one that I've been fiddling with. Here we have a Napa Carlisle, a respectable socket. And we can see that this icon is actually the same diameter as this Carlisle chrome socket. So this will be high access, but it's just, wow, if it's no thicker than a hardened chrome vanadium socket and it's a little bit softer chrome molybdenum, how is it really going to hold up? And of course, that holds true as well with the deep wells. Sometimes deep well sockets can be a little thicker than their short well counterparts just because they're dealing with just a longer socket and a little more force. Let's really impress upon it. Actually, I'm going to be a little facetious here, but here's an inch drive proto 15/16 socket. This is a 3/8 drive, of course, but both of these sockets drive the same size fastener, and there's obviously kind of a difference in the wall thickness there. Those are thick walls. Why they make inch drive sockets that small when you're working on? Some people talk about Honda crank bolts being difficult to remove. Try removing a crank bolt off a 16-liter diesel engine. Those can be tough fasteners to work with. And I actually do have a couple of snap-on ones here. So if you were to get something nice like the snap-ons, for instance, you do get something that's just much more usable. It's just a little bit more compact. You have a much longer straight extension. Snap-on has different styles of impact sockets. So these are high access, low torque style snap-ons, but we can see just a huge difference there. There's a lot more access. So in this, there are some things where snap-ons are pretty nice. And I was going to mention something else. They do advertise, short fluting so the fasteners, or if you're working with nuts, don't fall too far into the socket. Some people like deep fluting. I kind of like shallow fluting because in most situations, deep fluting doesn't help me. It's just an icon advertises as being shallow fluted, but man, that fastener still goes pretty far in there. It goes, all the way down to there. So it isn't fully fluted, but it's still pretty deep. We're on the snap-on here. This is a shallow flute. It just drops in just a tiny amount. This is the type of shallow fluting where you can just drop a nut in there and then be able to use the socket to get the nut started. That's one of the advantages to actually having shallow flutes is when you're working with little nuts. Anyway, let's go hammer a fastener. I got a 3/4 inch fastener, so I'll go and hammer it with this socket and see if it initially really starts rounding out. I found some impact sockets that have poor heat treatment. It's surprising. They'll wear, you can just hammer on one bolt just for a minute and cause a surprising amount of wear. So we'll see if they, appear to hold up just after some real light initially impacting, and then I'll do an update later about their long-term viability. Okay, I'm using the DeWalt DCF 887, so new generation, about 150 foot-pounds of torque on paper, brushless impact. This would be about half or less than half the power of a professional grade 3/8 inch air impact. Those are around 300 to even 400 foot-pounds. Some of those are getting way more powerful than any 3/8 inch drive square can take, so I don't even know how they're achieving that. Ooh, that's going to be a hot fastener. That is a, there we go. That's a Supertanium 8 line bolt. Do it one more time for good measure. Alrighty. Alrighty here. Let's get a little bit of zoom going on. So we can see it's not really too bad. It didn't seem to really dent the fluting too much. That was a very hard bolt. That was the point of it. And we can see even on the drive side, there's just a touch of rounding. So I've bought really cheap impact sockets before where you would do just one operation like that, and it's amazing. It just totally will start denting and rounding out the drive side. And you can really see it right at the edges of the flutes where they start rounding off really early. So that's just a single bolt, so I'll do an updated review, but so far for 85 bucks for a 24-piece set, fractional set that doesn't skip from 5/16 through 1 inch, that pretty much covers everything. You may, like I have a couple Craftsman quarter-inch ones, so I'll fill it out so they're 13-piece sets. And I wish they would have done that. If they're going to do 12-piece, come on, what's the harm in including the quarter-inch? But for what they're selling them for, they're only like what, $20 or $25 more than the Pittsburghs when you use the coupon. So really considering, I think these are more of a balance. I mean, I think these impact sockets are a bit thin wall, but it means that except for the 5/8 for some reason, they'll get into a lot of spaces, and the easy warranty you can get out of them. I really think that these fractional sets, and I mentioned that in my swivel socket review, I think out of all the icon sockets, I think the fractional impacts are really the best value that Harbor Freight has right now. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.